Welcome to the webinar. This is Richie. So the EU AI Act is perhaps the most important piece of AI legislation for businesses at the moment. So if you create AI or you make use of AI and do any business within the European Union, then it affects you. And one of the critical pieces of this legislation is that it contains a requirement for your employees to be AI literate. That is, if your colleagues work with AI, then they are legally required to have an understanding of it. And today we're going to cover the EU AI Act at a high level to see what it involves. And the big focus is going to be on the AI literacy requirements and how you can comply with them. And I've got two fantastic guests for you. So first up is Will Barrow. He's a senior associate at Ashurst. So Will provides legal counsel for organizations working on digital transformation projects. And he's got over 10 years of experience providing legal advice, and he's helped many clients solve legal problems around data and AI. He's got expertise both in the EU AI Act and also other AI legislation. And previously, Will was a legal counsel for KFC and a legal secondee at Santander UK. So, welcome, Will. Next up is Anandhi Vivek. She's the Chief Responsible AI Officer at Esdha. And Anandhi has over 20 years of experience helping organizations with AI technology compliance, responsible AI literacy, and governance. She provides executive advice, consulting, and training around the EU AI Act, and as well as NIST, ISO 42001, and other technology compliance. And Anandhi's provided data and AI literacy training to providers and deployers of AI systems. And she's also the founder of AI Literacy Academy, and she organizes the Brum AI community. And previously, she led the digital service team at BGASS and was a lead researcher at the Health and Safety Executive, where, fun fact, I also used to work, but different places and times to Anandhi. All right, brilliant. So this interview might be a sort of interview of two halves. We're going to focus on the legal side of things first, so lots of questions for William, and then later on we're going to focus a bit more on the training side of things, so lots of questions for Anandhi. I'm going to try and mix it up a little bit, but it might be a little bit one than the other. All right, so let's kick off. And just to begin with, just at a high level, can you talk me through what does the EU AI Act cover? William, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll kick off on this one. So, I mean, you gave a pretty good intro at the start. It is the world's first comprehensive regulation of AI. It sort of broadly aims to cover the full life cycle of AI systems, so from their development, but also to their use by deployers. It's broadly aimed at ensuring their use of AI within the EU is safe and trustworthy and human-centric, has a human in the loop. But it also has the dual aim of trying to enable the EU to be a hub for AI innovation, largely by providing a sort of certain clear regulatory framework. I'll do a quick scoot through of the Act itself, but it takes a risk-based approach. It sort of differentiates AI systems into four risk-based categories. And we can talk about what they are in a little bit more detail maybe later, but they're broadly systems that basically pose no or very minimal risk, systems that provide or rather pose a limited risk or a sort of a transparency related risk, systems that pose a high risk, which obviously carry the weight of the most obligations, and then systems that pose an unacceptable risk, and those are banned. Sort of another key aspect of the Act is that it catches various players in the AI value chain in different ways, and different obligations apply to each. Principally, it catches developers, which the Act calls providers, and it also catches deployers, which are essentially professional AI users of a system that has been put to market by a developer or a provider. They're the two main categories of sort of business that will be captured by the AI Act, but it also catches other actors in the value chain, importers, distributors, and it also catches big developers of general purpose AI systems, so OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta, with a set of more strict requirements even. A very, very important thing to bear in mind with the EU AI Act is it doesn't just apply within the EU. And this is something that, is particularly interesting to the legal community anyway. Some of you may be familiar with the GDPR and the way that the GDPR affected businesses worldwide, because it was based on not just where a business is located, it's based on where the effect of the processing or the system or the output is felt. And the AI Act adopts a similar approach, essentially. So you can't assume just because you're based outside of the EU, you can ignore it and you can ignore the literacy requirements, for example. So broadly, the Act applies to any businesses that supply AI systems within the EU, so developers basically, and that's regardless of whether they're established in the EU or not. And it will also apply to businesses, so developers and business users, so not just those people supplying AI located outside of the EU. And it'll bite if the output of their AI systems is used within the EU. So it's very, very broad. Essentially, if you're a developer and you have any ambitions to supply systems in the EU, you're caught. If you're a business user or deployer, and at the output of your systems is felt within the EU, so perhaps on your employees located within the EU or your customers located within the EU, then you're also caught. I guess without diving into too much detail and becoming a nerdy lawyer on you all, the final bit to note is when the Act came into force, which was on the 1st of August, and the transitional periods as to when it is actually going to bite and apply to your businesses. So most provisions will apply after a 2-year transition period, so 1st of August 2026. However, critically for this session, some provisions come into force earlier. Provisions on AI literacy will come into effect after 6 months, so 1st of Feb next year, alongside the ban on unacceptable risk AI systems, and the rules on general purpose AI, which is slightly less relevant for this session, will apply after 12 months.
Okay, so the fact that it's so wide ranging is pretty incredible. So it's like, I guess there might be a lot of people going, well, I'm a company based in the US and I do a bit of business in Europe, but actually it's still going to apply to them, even just because they have customers in Europe, not necessarily they have to be based somewhere in the European Union.
Essentially, yes. So the test is for developers is whether they are placing on the market or putting into service an AI system within the EU, and that's a fairly broadly defined concept. So, like I say, if you have any ambitions to provide any of your AI systems within the EU, which is a large market, so usually for most providers is going to be the case, you are caught. And yeah, likewise for businesses that are just deploying or using AI systems, if that output is felt within the EU, so on their customers within the EU or on their employees, then the rules will apply. And yeah, that it's very wide, and I think may come as a shock to some people, especially those that aren't familiar with maybe the data protection regulations that kind of take a similar approach.
Okay. So the other interesting thing was around the risk classification system. So, William, you mentioned that there are things AI can be classified as minimal risk or high risk. Actually, Anandhi, can you give me some examples of like what sort of AI might fall under each of these different categories?
Yeah, I was on mute. Okay. Yes, so we have minimal risk, which means they're not going to be regulated at all, and there are some systems like virtual assistants or chatbots or email spam filters, which we use in Google Mail or if you're using it. So those are classified as limited risk systems. And systems which are used for law enforcement systems, which William may be able to share, as well as biometric identification, they are classed as high-risk systems. One of the high-risk systems is also the recruitment or HR system. So a few years ago, we had a very big company which released a HR system for AI system to shortlist their candidates. Was having bias in the system. So those are now classified as high-risk systems. And unacceptable risk are systems which are using emotional recognitions at work and education, or systems that use for behavioral manipulation, or even social credit scoring systems. They are classed as unacceptable risk systems.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, I can certainly see how something that's designed to manipulate your behavior is going to be pretty nasty stuff, especially at work. Okay, so let's talk about what happens if you don't comply. So if you fail to comply with any of these regulations, what are the consequences going to be? William, do you want to take this?
Yeah, I can do. So potentially great, I think, is probably the key takeaway on this point. So the Act itself, it will largely be enforced by the member states at a national level. So it won't be sort of the EU at large necessarily enforcing against businesses. It will be the nationally appointed regulator that enforces the AI Act. So we don't know who those regulators are going to be yet. They are in the process, or member states are in the process of figuring out who that's going to be. It could well be regulators that will be familiar to a lot of businesses. So potentially it might be an extension of responsibility for the data protection regulators in the jurisdiction. So the DPC in Ireland, BFDI in Germany, or it could be an entirely new body. It depends on how seriously the member state views AI compliance. And yeah, if you're naughty and you don't comply, what's going to happen to you? Well, depends on the nature of the breach, but likely you'll get a notice of non-compliance with the Act. They will ask you to remediate breaches. They might ask you to stop using your AI system. They might ask you to withdraw it from the market. They may ask you to recall it entirely. They're kind of practical remedies, so all quite severe. But I think probably one of the most eye-catching things about the AI Act is the additional very high monetary penalties. And these are precedent-setting. They're very, very big. They're much bigger than the GDPR, which was shocking to the world at the time. And broadly speaking, it is, I think, 35 million or 7% of your annual turnover for non-compliance with the ban on unacceptable risk systems. So, the systems that you were talking about before, social scoring, manipulating individuals to circumvent their free will, those kind of bad ones. So very high fines for rolling those out in breach of the Act. But still high, 15 million, or I think 3% of global turnover for violations of the other obligations of the AI Act more widely. So we're just talking more general breaches now, and that's a significant sum. And a slightly lower tier of 7.5 million, or about 3%, just for supplying incorrect, incomplete, or misleading information to whoever your national market surveillance authority is. So it's quite a lot for potentially a fairly benign breach. But that comes with the caveat that the fines generally are based on the nature of the breach, and you won't get a 7.5 million fine for everything you do wrong. But they will consider nature, gravity, duration of the infringement, your size and market share, whether you've cooperated with the regulator or not, whether you intentionally breached or whether you were negligent in your breach, things like that. But I think it's the key takeaway on this is the potential liabilities and risks for non-compliance are significant, and businesses really should be looking now within the sort of time frame that they have to all the periods within which the EU AI Act is allowing for compliance to sort of get on the front foot and start with their compliance programs, including training.
Okay, yeah. So I think 7% of your revenue is that's a pretty healthy find. So
Yeah.
I think it's something to be concerned about and take some steps against getting fined that much. Okay, so
Yeah. So also the missed opportunity, isn't it? So you put in so much of resource, everything for developing, and ultimately it doesn't meet the requirement. So it's a missed opportunity. I think it's also a big drawback, or
that's a very
Yeah.
good point.
yeah.
You gonna spend money to develop an AI system or to implement an AI system, and then if you've got to withdraw it immediately because it doesn't comply, then yeah, that's a big waste of money.
Absolutely. There's wasted costs, and also I guess what we didn't touch on is reputational impact is huge with these kind of breaches. And I think the closest thing we have that's been around for a while is the data protection regulations in the EU. And most people are aware now when there's a big data breach and when people are getting fined and slapped on the wrist, and it does drive customers away. So yeah, there's outside of the eye-popping fines, there are a lot more pieces of the puzzle.
Okay. All right. So let's get into more depth on Article 4. So this is around AI literacy. So what are the requirements on companies for this? Anandhi, do you want to take this?
Yeah. So the Article 4 in EU Act states that providers and deployers of AI systems shall take measures to ensure to their best extent a sufficient level of AI literacy of their staff and other persons dealing with the operation and use of AI systems on their behalf. So the reason I'm studying exactly what is there is because sometimes being a non-legal person, we can easily misinterpret things. So I just want to make sure that I specify what is there in the act. So it takes into account the technical knowledge, what experience, what education training you have got in context of AI systems, and then you need to make sure that they are fully trained. So that is what the requirement is. For me, Ruchi, before, like in 2016, when I was talking about empowering when I was working for government sectors, I was saying we need to empower leaders, because leaders are the ones who need to first get started with AI, right? There was a lot of pushback. And even in like 2019, when I was talking in a conference about the compliance issues, the regulation issues, the bias, and all these issues, people are talking about, like, they were asking in the Q&A, now, Dr. Anandhi, we have got the system in place. We are close to getting into testing phase. So is this the right time for us to get started thinking about regulation? I said, no, you have to start that from the beginning, right? It's not like an add-on. So compliance is not an add-on. You have to start from the beginning. So people didn't get it, right? So I've been fighting on this one for many, many years. And now with the UAI Act, I see Article 14 there saying it is a requirement. So it's a big welcome for me, because I think, especially after ChatGPT came into force, a lot of organizations or people think AI is equals to ChatGPT, which is not, right? So there's lots to it. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, so it's a common sort of conflation. Do you think that just these generative AI tools, these large language models, those count as like all of AI, but actually, even something that's been around for 100 years, like logistic regression, that also counts as AI,
Yeah.
especially if you're using it to
Yeah.
make decisions. Okay, so William, do you want to get into a bit more depth here? So we've mentioned the difference between like providers of AI and deployers of AI. So whether you're creating systems or using them, are there different requirements around AI literacy for each of these groups?
No. So I think the AI literacy requirements under Article 4 that we just talked about is on both providers and deployers. I think it's probably worth just explaining and unpacking a little bit more what those two terms mean. So a provider is essentially a developer, really, of an AI system that puts that system onto the market or places it into service within the EU, I think it's going to be pretty clear. If you are a provider, I think you're going to know whether you are doing that, and even whether you're located out of the EU, you're probably going to know that the EU AI Act applies to you fairly rapidly anyway. A deployer, though, is essentially a non-personal business user of an AI system that is provided by a provider. So this catches a lot of people that might have thought they probably weren't caught by the AI Act because they're not developing AI, and all with the caveat that this can apply anywhere within the world, assuming that the output of these systems is felt within the EU. And it's also kind of worth mentioning the reclassification risk, I suppose. There are a set of rules in the Act that basically mean that if you are a deployer, you might unintentionally find yourself becoming a provider. In some ways, there are some obvious ways by which this happens. So one is if you white label someone else's AI system and put it onto the market in the EU. Yeah, okay, fine. You're seen to be a provider and subject to more strict rules. But there are also slightly more vague ways. So if you repurpose an AI system in a way that wasn't intended by the original provider, especially in a way that takes it from being low risk to being high risk, then suddenly you'll be reclassified and you'll be subject to these more strict rules, of which there are a lot. And this kind of ties back to the training piece, really. So we thought about this in some of our advice for clients quite recently, actually. What's a practical scenario under which I could be reclassified as a provider, and one of them feasibly could be where, for example, you roll out a general HR inquiries chatbot to your HR team, and one of your employees unexpectedly, unintentionally uses it to start scanning people's CVs and perhaps making recruitment decisions about those people or employment decisions about those people, which is classified as a high risk activity in the AI Act. So if that was done by that employer, you may, as a business, unbeknownst to yourselves, suddenly become subject to the higher requirements. The only way you can really, or one of the ways you can really effectively control for that, is by training your employees to make sure that they are using these AI systems in a responsible way. So, looking at Article 4, it's from a lawyer's perspective, sort of clear as mud, really, and it's the way you can read it will require a lot of organisations to roll out a lot of quite comprehensive training programs. But even without Article 4, it would be basically essential to make sure your staff are properly trained, to make sure that you don't breach all of the other aspects of the EU AI Act, one of which I've just mentioned, but there are many, many more. So, the requirement for training really does run through the sort of DNA of the regs.
Okay, yeah, I can certainly see how you could sort of instantly create like a help chatbot for HR to just relieve some pressure on HR for answering questions about like when's the next like company holiday or whatever, and then suddenly someone starts asking like, well, how do I get promoted in this? And suddenly it changes the risk.
Or please could you look at this person's CV and tell me if I should employ them or not? It's perhaps a bit of a silly example, but it's not impossible.
Absolutely. Okay, and so let's get into like what sort of skills you might need to be considered AI literate. So, Anandhi, can you talk me through some of the AI skills that you might need?
It depends. It depends on who needs training. So, for example, if you, like I started off with leaders, right? So leaders do need to understand what AI can do and cannot do. Or what is the data requirement, or how should they think about data governance procedures, as well as they also need to understand about the policies, regulations in a high level, so they can guide the organization appropriately. So different, and if we think about developers, like William was saying, even if you are outside the EU and if you are going to be a provider or a developer of the system, then you still need to abide with the EU AI Act. So one of our client was a US company based in US. So when we were doing AI literacy training, they said we want to go through the training now, which was really big welcome, because as soon as the EU AI Act released, people started thinking about AI literacy. And they said, I was asking what was the reason, right? We want to understand, why are you coming for AI literacy training? And they said it's because we want to make sure that we understand the compliance requirements so that our developers can start thinking about the frameworks and principles in their design, so they can use the best practices, which is really good. So the AI literacy skills, it's actually depending on who the user is going to be, or who is the person going to be in the organization.
Okay, yeah, so that just makes sense that there can be different requirements around different teams. So if you're management, you need sort of high level understanding of this. If you're actually going to build an AI system, you can need a lot more AI skills there. And if you're just using a system, you just need to know, well, am I using this in the right way? And what are the consequences of me using it wrongly? Okay, so in terms of setting this up, I presume there's going to be someone in management who is accountable for ensuring that everyone is trained. Who's that going to be? Is it going to be someone in the C-suite? Actually, maybe Anandhi, this is another one for you, I think.
Yeah, so I get LinkedIn inquiries from people from different C-suite, from CDOs, Chief Data Officer. I've got inquiries from them, and then I've got inquiries from the people's officer as well, who are looking into the training. So yes, a lot of the things comes from the C-suite, but also from product owners and product managers, saying okay, how do we train our users, because we are going to be rolling out chat for the insurance. So it was an insurance company who came to us, and it was a middle management who approached me through LinkedIn, asking now what training do I need to provide for our users? Like William was saying, if a HR has a chatbot, you don't want other people to be going into the chatbot trying to scan for CVs. The same way the insurance company, they said because they were using a tool similar to Chat GPT within the organization, the employees were not sure what queries they have to put in to get the right response. So they were stuck there. And we also know a few months ago, when ChatGPT was released, there were companies who are putting their personal information into their personal company information into the ChatGPT, which became a public, which was visible for everybody in the public. So those kind of things. So how do we protect our privacy? So that also comes from the middle management.
Okay, so that's interesting. So it's not just the C-suite that needs to be in charge of training everyone. You've also got product managers. You've got I guess larger companies have a central learning and development function. Otherwise, it might be the people team. So there can be quite a few different managers involved in trying to set up training for their respective departments. Okay, and William, just related to this, beyond sort of pure technical AI skills, do people need legal training as well in order to make sure that they're literate around what's allowed, what's not allowed?
Absolutely. I mean, from my perspective, and Andy just touched on one, kind of the first step, or the most high priority skill, is to ensure that your employees are using their AI systems in a sort of safe and responsible way, obviously, but really a way that doesn't risk breaching applicable law. And that goes to things like not uploading personal data into systems that are not appropriate to have personal data uploaded into. I mean, that's an immediate breach of data subject rights. And as I said before, not using systems in a way that they're not intended to be used, which risks breaching applicable laws around classification or even your contracts with your providers, which are probably going to say you must use our system in compliance with the instructions for use that we give you. So yeah, it's absolutely critical, really, from my perspective, that there is a sort of broad training that is not complicated, but for almost everybody in the business that's going to touch with and interact AI systems in a certain way, on how that's done appropriately. You know, and then the potential outcomes of not doing it appropriately, be that, you know, employment outcomes or potential outcomes for the business. And I think what businesses should bear in mind, and probably what employees will start to see more and more, is AI training start to filter into businesses in the same way that data protection and information security training filtered in sort of post 2016, 2017, when a lot of big regulations around data protection came into force. Because these, outside of just law, these regulations touch the whole organization, really. So it's important, as Anandhi says, you know, it's ultimately the C-suite will be responsible for breaches, but it filters down through the entire organization. So broad legal training and safe and responsible use training is really critical.
Yeah, so yeah, sorry, Richie, to just jump into it, because I think it's essential if you are developing AI, whether you're a provider or a deployer or a company who's trying to use it. I think everybody needs to understand what the regulation means to them, so that they can collaborate with the, if you're a development, then you have the whole organizations collaborating together. Otherwise, only the legal team will be aware of what the EU Act does, but there won't be any systems in place to manage the risk within the tech team, and there won't be any governance, no accountability wider if you look into the organization. So what we do is we provide AI literacy, as well as we provide UAI compliance, technical compliance, as well, for organizations, so that they can understand what they need to do in order to achieve, be compliant.
Okay, yeah. So it seems like at the end of the day, it's going to be the C-suite, probably the CEO, who's going to be on the hook if you're not complying with stuff, and they're really not going to be happy if or the board's not going to be happy if the company gets fined 7% of revenue. But actually, probably the implementation is going to come down a little bit lower in the organization. Okay, so in terms of how many skills you need, like I presume it's not going to be like everyone needs to be an expert in PyTorch just to say, okay, I've got AI skills. What's the sort of level needed? Like how can you say, okay, we have enough AI skills that we are compliant? Like what level do you need people to get to, and how do you prove that?
I suppose I could jump in from a legal perspective. I think, unpacking the recital, the Article 4 requirements, and there's some associated recitals which also help with understanding of what it really means. The whole organisation will probably require some sort of training, but it's probably going to look like, for pure compliance purposes, something more like a tiered approach. So based on job role and amount of interaction with AI, or role in relation to AI. So, sort of unpacking it simply, I suppose staff that are involved in the development of or who's significantly interact with AI will need to have more comprehensive training. But even down to staff that don't interact with AI much, they'll probably need to receive something. I think if you can sort of demonstrate to a regulator that you have rolled out that tiered approach, you're likely to be ticking the regulatory box to say that you have ensured to your best extent that the right people in the organization have a sufficient level of AI literacy, taking into account their technical knowledge, etc., etc., etc. Because it's quite the requirement overall is quite vague. So I think businesses do need to think about what it means specifically and what it means practically in terms of who they need to train in what way, and that's going to look different for every single business. But I mean, the broad thrust is very clear: is that providers and deployers that are caught by the acts will need to make an effort to educate all levels of their business in the appropriate way.
Okay, so it sounds like a lot of it is really just, it depends what you're doing. Maybe we can try and make this more concrete with an example. So I suppose going back to the HR example, suppose you've got someone in the people team, they're using an AI tool in order to help them screen candidates or help them make hiring decisions. What sort of training are they going to need? Like, what's enough to say I know enough about AI that I'm compliant? Sorry, it's probably a difficult question.
I can
Yeah, Anandhi?
try. I can try and answer that. And William, you could add your inputs from the legal perspective as well. Let's start from like me. Like if I was applying to the organization, then I need to be aware that the organization is using AI to screen my CV, right? So it has to start from me. So, and I need to know what are the risks that I need to go through it, how my data will be stored, what is going to happen with my CV after I get a rejection, and all these things. So I need to be empowered as a user from the organization. The next thing, let's take the next step, which is the HR team, because once I submit my CV, the HR team is going to look at it. So the HR team should know how they should handle my CV, how they are going to store my CV, where it's going to be stored, what are their liabilities, what are the risks they involve, it involves, and what are the implications as well. So and they should also know that the HR, if he or she has been given some prompts or some analysis from my CV, then they should know, like, how much it is going to be accurate. What is the accuracy, for example, and how much they should trust the system, or where they should go and dwell deep into it. So where should the human be involved in this process? So all those things they need to be aware of. And finally, when it comes to the management as well, they need to understand how I have been shortlisted for the role. So and for the developers, they need to be understanding who are the different demographics who would be applying for this role, and do they have enough data for them to do the training, and have they done the training to ensure that it's a good representation of everybody. So there's, like, in various, sorry, I'll just try to, so you threw something random, a random example, I think.
No, I think it was a very good response.
Mm.
Sorry, William, did you want to add to that?
No, I thought that was a great and very comprehensive response. The only thing I think I would add is on the point of the people who are essentially feeling the effects of the HR system, or whatever system it might be. And if you are deploying those systems in your business, there is a express obligation on you to make sure the people who are feeling the effects, so people that are already employed, the people that are feeling the effects of that system and the decisions that may be made about them in relation to it, are told about it. And being told about it includes understanding it, and understanding it includes an element of training. So yeah, absolutely, the HR team will need to understand the risks and the ways to use the system appropriately. But even the sort of unexpected levels of people that may never even interact with an AI system in their role at all are still going to have some understanding of the systems that are being used in relation to them. So yeah, I thought Anandhi hit the nail on the head when she said, you've got to be transparent with the people that are essentially feeling the effects.
So,
Yeah.
Richie, going back to your question as to who needs training. So, before you get to that point of who needs training, first we need to understand the whole journey. So, if you're implementing a system like the HR system, starting from the end user through to the developers and the management, we need to understand the whole system in place and see who are the users who are affected by the system, or who are involved, primarily, secondarily, or even who are remotely responsible for it. So we need to make sure that we have training in place in response to Article 14 throughout the whole user journey.
Okay, yeah, that seems very important. Is trying to decide who's going to be affected by an AI system, and that's how you decide they're going to need training. And it might not just be the people who are using the AI system; it might be the people who are downstream from that. Yeah, so I suppose like even with the HR example, it's not just like for hiring external candidates. If you're using it for promotion as well, and it's like one of the people in your team comes up to you and says, "Okay, well, why didn't I get promoted?" And your boss is just like, yeah, AI says no, sorry. And that could be a surprise to everyone, and you don't want that to happen because that's
and one of the important thing in understanding the journey is you also fill in, you also tick other check boxes in the EU AI Act. For example, the EU AI Act says that you need to be transparent with your end users to say where AI has been used. So if you are using AI for screening, for example, this HR, then the end user needs to understand. And again, that's so a lot of the time I say compliance is not a checkbox, but I'm using the word checkbox here just to say that, yes, by understanding the system, you are trying to meet a lot of other requirements as well. So I think we need to think about, sorry, this topic, if you take, I will go on for ages, okay? I'm really passionate about it to make sure that people do responsible AI innovation so that their innovation doesn't fail, or they can succeed and see the fullest ROI for the AI. So one of the important thing here is it's not just about a training, it's also helping the whole organization to be looking at compliance perspective. So compliance is not a checkbox, it's a journey. It's a journey, so it needs to be started from the early onset. So although William said you have like 6 months for AI literacy or 12 months for other systems, I think the earlier you start with these groundwork, it's like building a car, right? So you have the car, so you need the design, you need to know what fits in where, you need to understand what goes in where, and then you need to have like the engine, the steering or whatever. So you have to make sure everything is there along with the testing and continuous monitoring. So embarking in AI is like a research project. So it's not a, yes, I have got the software in place, I'm done. No, it's not like that. So you have to keep on iterating and training.
Okay, yeah, certainly you don't want to be waiting and saying, well, okay, we're being audited next month. Let's figure out how we pass the audit. You start off when you're like you design stuff. And it's the same with like things like IT systems, security systems, data privacy systems. Like you want to design that in at the start. You need the training at the point where you're designing things rather than just when someone's about to come into the office and say, not sure that complies with everything. Okay, so just in order to like prove that you are complying with stuff, I mean, I guess the data camp approach is everyone should just take the understanding the EU AI Act data camp course, and then you've got a certificate to say, okay, we've done some training. So, I mean, William, you mentioned that if you can sort of prove you put in efforts to like try and comply with things, then the fines are likely to be a bit lower. Are there any other ways you can show that you have like at least tried to comply with the regulation?
I think so, and this is what a lot of our clients are grappling with right now. In how do they embark on this journey from being not compliant with something that's brand new to being compliant, or at least compliant enough to demonstrate to a regulator that they've had a really good go, and please don't fine me. And training is one part of that. I'd expect training to sort of form a central part of the business's overall AI governance framework. In the end, and once that training has been rolled out and sufficiently engaged with, then your ability to document and prove that you've mapped that back to certain key risks that you have identified through your AI systems, and how training is mitigating or partly mitigating those risks. So this is a bit convoluted, but so at a basic level, can we safely say that training has mitigated the potential compliance risk or reputational risk or privacy and data protection risk associated with using an HR AI system, as we've been talking about HR AI systems. And I think in terms of measuring how close you are to compliance, so we at Ashurst, we have a non-legal risk advisory arm, who are much more interesting than the lawyers, and sort of act for our clients in a more practical way. And one of the big things they're working on at the moment is the roadmap to AI compliance, and how we figure out where we are. And part of that is rolling out things like AI skills inventories and gap assessments, surveys, self-assessment tools, performance evaluations to measure staff skills on use of AI. Benchmarking against what your competitors are doing is always a good way to figure out at an early stage how you're placed, and sort of generally getting a feel for what your organization's AI risk culture is. So how is risk managed and treated? What's the culture around learning and flagging incidents already? What's your sort of house view of what AI skills are required within the organization to mitigate any risks that you're identifying through your general sort of compliance framework? If you make a good effort to do all of those things, and a lot of those things and outputs and risk assessments are well documented, you could still screw up, to be honest. There's no perfect resolution. Someone could still go off and not do your training and use an HR AI system in a way that you didn't intend, in a way that gets you a slap on the wrist from the regulator. But if you have not done any of those things, and you have not rolled out adequate training, or got the lawyers and their associates to help you with what your whole broader web of associated AI controls looks like, then you're likely to get a much swifter rebuke and potentially fines from a regulator. If you can document and demonstrate that you have done those things, you're going to be in a much better position. So yeah, there are certainly a whole bunch of practical steps that businesses are already taking, and if they're not, should really be looking to take as soon as possible. And training is a huge part of that.
So one of
Okay.
the so there's no one size fits all, right? So it depends on, again, going back to who needs skills, AI literacy skills. It depends on who they are within the organization, and what level of skills do they have currently, and what do they need to do in order to build it. So what we do is, we, like William was saying, we do have like a survey, pre-survey, post-survey. We try to understand what each organization, what level of skills does the organization have currently, and how do we need to roll out the training program. And that is like an iterative process. So when do we know everybody has got the AI literacy? It's really hard, but it's a continuous process. So like AI is a continuous journey. So organizations go through a continuous learning process. The other thing is with regards to guardrails. So putting the correct guardrails in place, again, that comes to understanding the AI. So what AI can do, cannot do, what are the implications. So we also help organizations to put guardrails in place to ensure that they have all the measures to be compliant.
Okay. We're going to go to audience questions soon, but can you just give us an example of a guardrail that you might put in place?
Okay, so it's again depends, right? It depends on what the organization is doing and who's doing. Going back to the HR example, so yeah, looking into what are the privacy, what are the bias. So how are you managing bias? How are you managing data privacy? How are you the data governance plays a key role here. So what is the data governance? So what are the procedures? What policies do you have in place?
Okay, excellent. Yeah, so policies and procedures, just like saying, just limiting what you can do to stop you doing stupid stuff. Excellent. All right, so just very quickly, have you got any final advice for organisations wanting to comply with the EU AI Act, William?
Yeah, I think we're early in the journey. Be aware of the risks posed by the AI Act, but also other applicable AI regs. I mean, other regulators are taking similar approaches. The UK approach has been very hands off, but with a new administration recently coming in, that's very likely to change. And sort of in relation to the AI literacy piece, because that's what we've been looking at. I mean, be aware of what you need to do to achieve compliance with Article 4 and the specific literacy requirements. Also, just think about how it's going to support your wider compliance with the AI Act or whatever else applies to you as a whole. That's kind of your baseline. That's your baseline requirement. But I always try and remind myself not to get too negative. Lawyers are trained to look at the risks in everything, and it all gets a bit negative. I mean, arguably, the most important thing is making sure, and I'm sure Anandhi will agree with this, is making sure the training maximizes the business's objective of using the AI in the first place. Like, are you enabled by the training to use the AI in an effective way while managing the risk? It's double pronged. Kill off the risk as much as you can, maximize effective use of the tool. And we haven't really touched on that so much here, but I think it's an incredibly important part of AI training. And in terms of organizations and personal experience of that, we have recently rolled out across our entire firm an AI tool, a professional services AI tool called Harvey, and that's global, just worldwide. We're the first firm to do it. And we have very seriously thought about the kind of gating requirements to use the tool and how we're going to train people effectively to use it. And at a base level, before you're allowed to use the tool, we make you do simple AI training, manage the risks. The compliance box, and I know you'll hate this, Anandhi, but the compliance box is sort of ticked. So, we're not letting anybody use it unless we know for sure they have been through the training and we have told them the absolutely do not do's with this AI tool. But on top of that, we have a second layer of training, which is the how can you use this thing effectively? And we've had third-party providers in, including the person who created the tool, the company Harvey, to give, again, firm-wide training on effective prompting, how to use a tool to get the best output, the limitations, not like regulatory compliance red flag limitations, but just general limitations of using the tool, like how do you get the best output for the input that you're putting in, what can it do, what can't it do. So yeah, I guess my final advice is, obviously I'm a lawyer, be very, very aware of what the regulations say to you and how you should meaningfully comply with them, but really don't see it as just a compliance exercise. See where you can extract the benefits from a good training program and a good compliance program generally.
Okay, so I do like the idea that your training isn't just going to be about, avoiding risk of getting fined or whatever. It's actually, if people are using AI, they need to be trained how to use the tool effectively. So really, you're going to get that productivity boost as well as just complying with the legislation. All right, Anandhi, final advice.
Yeah. I was just about to ask, can I add an example to this here? Because one of a big financial services came to us. They said they have already built in a few AI tools, but the employees within the organization were not adopting it. So can we do some training? So it was like a reverse engineering, right? So you build it and now they don't, they push it back. So you are trying to train them. So the outcome was that, like, once I did the AI literacy training throughout the workforce, my success was actually the HR department, not just your HR department example, Ruchi. The HR department came to the C-suite and they said, look, now that we have got all these data, so we have got all these things. And Dr. Anandhi told us we could do these things, and other organizations are leveraging data to create these kind of tools for HR. Can we have a workshop so that we can see how we can use AI system for our HR? So that is the kind of thing we are looking for. So don't think of AI literacy as a checkbox activity. It is, but no matter where you are in this journey, whether you are in the starter, not even started with the AI, it's better that you empower yourself, your staff, and everybody within the organization with the AI, because you don't know what they will come up with to make their work efficient. Because what organizations currently do is bring in consultants, including myself, to tell or to dictate them what AI can and cannot do for the organization. All the consultants are good in what they are doing, but they do not know the ins and outs of what your organization is doing. So when you empower your organization with AI literacy, by that I mean, trying to give them an understanding of how other organizations are using AI, what data is needed, how they can leverage the data, and talk about the various use cases for AI. That will open up a lot of eyes for people working within the organization, and who then will tell you where is the right place for them to use AI, where should our organization adopt AI. And this will also enhance a collaborative workforce, because a lot of the time we hear that AI is just like thought of as a textbook. It is no longer a textbook. And if you are thinking that way, then you should be aware that 70 to 80% of AI projects failed. It's because they don't have enough literacy. And organizations who have been successful, they are saying for every penny they spend on development, they also spend on literacy part. So that is the kind of thing we need to be thinking about. Don't think of this as a compliance requirement or anything. Think of this like, how do you succeed with AI? How can you make better return on investment? How can you develop better products? How can you automate your existing processes efficiently, scalable, and sustainable transformation?
All right, yeah, that seems brilliant advice. Is just really think about like, what are your use cases of AI and make sure that you're training people just on those use cases rather than just having like general, I know a bit about AI sort of training. All right, excellent. So before we go to audience questions, I just want to say we've got some a ton of upcoming webinars. So we got a load of code alongs coming up. So tomorrow we got a session on getting started with Java to celebrate DataCamp's upcoming Java curriculum. On Friday, there's a session on building effective dashboards in Tableau. Next Tuesday, we've got a session on building trustworthy AI agents. So it's actually all about ethical AI there. It's like, how do you make sure that the AI you're creating is trustworthy? Next Wednesday, we've got a session on Microsoft Fabric. And next Thursday, there is a session on bringing generative AI to the enterprise. So please do make use of the QR code to register for those. All right. Let's have a look at some audience questions. So this one comes from Them Baker saying, how far does this act reach? Is it only specific to European countries or does it extend outside? So William, you sort of touched on this, is that basically if you're doing business in the European Union, then it applies to you. You also mentioned that it's going to be national regulators who are responsible for sort of implementing whether or not you're complying and handing out the fines. What happens if you're outside the EU? Are there going to be national regulators in other countries that are checking for compliance?
Yeah, ultimately. So it's gonna, a few bits there. So I'll sort of unpack it from the beginning. So how far does the Act reach potentially globally? So it will apply to you very obviously if you are a business that is incorporated and does business within the European Union. No surprises there. But it will also apply to you if you are outside of the European Union, but you place on the market, and I'm using the kind of legal terms here, or put into service an AI system or general purpose AI, so foundation models basically, within the EU, irrespective of whether you are established or located in the EU or not. So, you could be anywhere in the world and decide, I am developing an AI system and I want that. Sorry, the lights are turning out in the room that I'm in, and I want that AI system to be available to users in the EU. And if that's the case, then you will need to comply with the rules of the EU AI Act, and you'll probably need to comply with them as a provider. And if your system is high risk, as an HR system, something of that nature, then those rules are quite fulsome, and they include things like AI literacy for your own staff. And so that's a kind of developers in an obvious case. If you are a business user or what we call a deployer, then you can also be located anywhere in the world, and you will be caught by the AI Act if the output of the system that you're deploying or using is felt within the union or used within the EU. So again, incredibly wide, and I think it will probably be the subject of some legal debate for the years to come as to what that really means, because it's potentially incredibly wide. If I have AI generated content on my website and that is seen within the European Union, does that mean I'm subject to the Act? That's an incredibly wide example, but a more obvious example is I am a business with employees located in the EU, and I'm rolling out an AI system across the union, across my business, and the output of that AI system will be used on and felt by employees within the EU, then, despite the fact that you actually might be located in the US, you're going to be in scope for the regs, and they're going to bite you as a deployer. So less strict obligations, but still a lot of obligations. So yes, and I think in terms of it will largely be national regulators who will be enforcing the Act. Like I said, we don't know who exactly they will be yet, but probably existing regulators with an extended scope of responsibility. So it will largely depend, and this kind of happens in the data protection context as well. It will largely depend where the effects of your AI system are most felt, and there are some obligations to make sure that you register with certain authorities, depending on what you're doing. But yes, it could feasibly be a national authority in a country in which you are not incorporated, dinging you with notices for non-compliance with an act to which you don't think you're subject because you're based somewhere else in the world. So yeah, has very long extraterritorial tentacles. Interestingly for legal folks, and unfortunately for the rest of the world.
All right, nowhere to hide then. Okay, we're a little over time, but there's one more question I want to get to. So if you're in rush, you have to jump, then please do catch up with us on the recording. So this was from Yvette. So Yvette asks, in terms of being able to demonstrate that you've done enough to train your employees and that they're skilled, are there certain diplomas or certifications likely to be requested? Anandhi, do you want to take this?
Yeah, Richie, you did touch upon Datacom's certification. There is nothing like a legally available certification or a program, but organizations like Datacamp are giving certifications for training, as well as what we do is we provide our own training, and we give you we evaluate where the organization is and what skills are required, and we provide training based on that. So yeah.
Okay, yeah, so no legal requirements, but take a Datacamp course, take some Esdha training, and that's going to stand you in good stead. All right, brilliant. Since we're well past time, we're going to wrap up there. So thank you so much, Anandhi. Thank you so much, William. Really informative stuff. Thank you to Reese for moderating. Thank you to everyone who asked the questions. I really didn't get to them all. Thank you to everyone who showed up today. So many great